Is this on? Great. No? Yes? Okay. Yep. Yes, there we go. Okay. So thank you for coming.
Oh, thank you.
We can take a seat here.
It's great to be here.
Okay, so I'm a early stage investor in startups, right? And so, in my life, I think that there are two things that are true. I think everything is a diffusion of knowledge problem, which is to say that someone knows something somewhere, and eventually everyone else might know that thing, right? That's one thing. And the other one is that there's still lots of secrets out there. I mean, that's kind of, to be honest, the point of startups, that there are these secrets that not everyone realizes, that if they only understood, then the world might be better. And I think in some ways, what you represent is you represent the confluence of both of those, in the sense that you have been consistently right about a bunch of things that everyone else thought was crazy, right? That there was a way in which, I were to go back, I don't know, there's like a funny thing right now where I think for many big organizations, you've got lots of consultants, and the consultants are all like, oh, this is how AI is going to work, or here's the chart about how to do this and that, and how to put your AI council together. And the funny thing about it is no one will acknowledge that almost everyone has been consistently wrong about how to think about AI and how to think about large language models, basically for the last 10 years, except maybe you. That there are a number of things that you understood before everyone else. And so what I'd like to do today is, one, just talk a little bit about those things that you got, the things that you sort of understood or intuited, 10 years ago about the direction of this. And then maybe talk a little bit about those things that folks don't really appreciate enough. So that's one. And then maybe talk a little bit about what that now means looking forward. And then in the middle of that, I'll ask a bunch of mean questions about why Google's not doing a better job. Okay, so let's go back first, right? I feel like there are a couple of key concepts that you understood that everyone else would just be like, I don't know, that makes no sense. There are a couple key bets that you made, and maybe we can talk a little bit about those to begin with. Like everything from, I don't know, I feel like you had just this very clear way of thinking about how small mechanisms or small things can scale in clear ways, and how that's surprising to all of us.
So the question is, what are the key insights many years ago that I got that many people did not realize, right? Well, I think the first insight that I got many years ago was language understanding is key to AI. And then the second concept that I got was next token prediction is key to language understanding. So there's two concepts here that sounds very simple.
But it is not obvious
to many people.
The course of AI, right? That everyone would say, oh, we need to have these super complicated knowledge graphs and then we'll solve everything.
Yeah. I guess that for the concept of why language understanding is key to AI is the idea that the intuition, right? A lot of these things are just intuition back then, and the idea of language understanding is key to AI. I had that intuition because I observed that, intuitively, blind people are also very smart.
Okay, so that's contrasting, like all the interest and love in computer vision, which everyone sort of felt was an important problem, and you said no.
I did my PhD in large-scale deep learning for computer vision, right? But then I thought long and hard about it, and I realized that we need to reduce AI to like the most fundamental problem, right? And then I realized if you apply the reduction approach, you realize that actually language understanding is at the heart of AI. And it's actually back then it's very controversial. Most people in deep learning work on computer vision, and if you talk to Jan LeCun, he would say, computer vision is at the heart of AI, not language understanding.
Right, and Jan LeCun, of course, being a genius and being amazing, and early on had this architecture that would be able to figure out, sort of zip codes from, sort of scanning, your mail and everyone, and so. But on the other hand, you had a fundamentally different understanding of what was possible.
So what's the question?
Oh, and then no, just actually, and then that takes you then to the other insight, right, around how you thought about like next token prediction and why that works.
Yeah. Okay. So the second concept, of course, is about next token prediction, right? So as you can tell, I'm trying every problem I solve. I'm trying to reduce it as the most simple and the most fundamental problem. And for language understanding, first, for AI, I reduce it to language understanding. And for language understanding, I reduce it to next token prediction. Because I feel like next token prediction is the simplest thing that you can do in language understanding, right? And
actually, so I think most folks around here get it, but you should just like unpack that a little bit because it is still so unintuitive and so weird that it actually works.
First of all, you can think of, let's say you want to write an email, right? So, write a prompt and then get the model to write an email. The whole email can be decomposed into the next token prediction, right? So intuitively, there's somehow you can get there because there's no other ways to do it easily because predicting the whole email is a very hard task in AI. Well, that's the first thing. Now, the second thing that this is more counterintuitive and this is controversial. It's actually amazing to say it to many people, but the predicting the next token is probably the hardest task in AI because predicting the next token shows a lot of understanding. Let's say you say, multiplying 7 and 3, the product of 7 and 3 is 21. Actually, to predicting the token 21 is a lot of computation, right? And if actually, you can extrapolate this a little bit further, and you say, you solve a math problem, and then at the end you come up with the answer. The final answer is actually pretty hard. So predicting the next token is insanely hard. It's probably one of the hardest tasks in AI.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's very beautiful in the following sense. So first of all, most problems can be reduced to the next token. And then the second thing is actually turned out to be the hardest task in front of you.
And then you meant, when we talked about it, you said the thing that is underappreciated is then you solve the whole set of other problems that people thought would be difficult, including something like common sense.
So one thing that I'm very interested in, and back in the day, 14 years ago, is the Turing test. And, when you talk to an AI, back then, that the concept of Turing test is very hard, right? But one thing that I realized that if I have an AI, if I test it, I will ask very common sense questions. It's actually easy to trip off these models using common sense. For example, you can ask things like, the trophy cannot fit the suitcase because it is too large. What is too large, right? For us, it's the trophy is too large, right? But for the model, it's very hard. I think common sense is very hard for these models, and the reason why it's so hard is that modeling common sense is actually counterintuitively is very difficult.
Yeah.
Because in order to do it, you have to basically write down all the facts in the world. And that's actually very hard, right? Because it's not scalable. Getting a human to do this. And the previous way to do it is like an expert system, where you can just write all the rules of the world, right? I learned about the people who do research in this area, where to write down all the rules. And first of all, if you write the first 1,000 rules, you feel like, oh, yeah, you can do it. But when you start writing into the million rules, it's actually very hard because you have to capture all the single detail. The second intuition is that if you think about a self-driving car, when it drives, the hardest part is the common sense, right? The common sense is that when you drive and you see, say, somebody have there's a stop sign in front of you, but there's somebody say, okay, you should go through, right? That's common sense because you know that there's construction workers that are actually telling you this way. This is common sense. If you ever read a driving, trying to get a driving license in the US, right? You read these books, and they say a lot of this is just common sense. So what they mean is that it's hard to teach by explaining in words.
Right. And the thing that strikes me, and the reason why I love both of these examples is I feel like there's the immediate obvious thing that someone might have tried, but what you did instead was to say, let me sort of go back and let me just sit here for a little longer and think deeply. I hate to use the word first principles, but almost from the point of view, I need to break this down and find, what is the simple thing, but also what is the simple thing that'll scale that turns out to be difficult to actually pull off. And I feel like that willingness to spend the time is something that's so hard for most of us, right? For most normal people, you're just trying to get the project done or whatever. You're just trying to finish the next meeting. And that willingness to pull back, I think, has been one of your key strengths. Now, take us sort of says, here we are now. I feel like there's a bunch of things that you understood about the world that everyone else is sort of adopting without maybe fully grokking. And then tell us about some of the things that you're doing now. What are some of the things that you and your team have been able to pull off in, I don't know, the last year? It feels like you guys have been so productive.
The things that I've been looking into is that one area that I'm very curious right now is theorem proving. It's a mathematical theorem proving. And why I'm so interested in this is that I think it's one area that the next token prediction we may find a lot of difficulty. So let me try to explain. Let's suppose that you want to solve, prove or disprove the P equal to NP conjecture or something like that, right? So let's say that. And the model can output you a proof. Now, it turns out that the proof of P equal to NP is actually very low likelihood from the model point of view. And because it never seen this data on the internet.
Right, because no one has actually proven that P equals NP, because if they
exactly.
did, the whole world would fall apart.
There's something else going on, and why human can do this kind of new task is about right or wrong. It's just not about the next token prediction. So there's something else is going on is about right or wrong, right? And that's what I'm interested in right now, is how to go a little bit beyond next token prediction. Even though, as I said, the next token prediction is probably one of the hardest tasks in AI. I realized that there's another harder task, which is to prove P equal to NP conjecture. And how you do that is it's very hard to do with next token prediction alone.
Yeah. Okay, but what does it mean to be right or wrong? I feel like you've now reduced sort of some very complicated ideas into one simple idea, one simple question. So what does that even mean?
Right or wrong, meaning that you look at the proof and then you say the proof is right or wrong, basically, right? And for a human, basically, that just means not just the final answer is right or wrong, but every step in the reasoning is right or wrong. So, and because of thought experiment, right? The thought experiment on how to prove or disprove P equal to NP conjecture, we started looking into what we call reasoning. So in the last few years, you see all these people talking about, reasoning, right? And large language model can do reasoning. Me and some of my team members work on a lot of things like chain of thought. You heard of chain of thought reasoning?
What is that?
A chain of thought reasoning meaning that if you have a large language model and if you ask it for the answer, it will not give you an answer, a correct answer. But if you ask it to think out loud, you say, let's think step by step and make it think out loud.
Has everyone, I'm assuming, if you have not done this, you should do this with ChatGPT only because, or anyone, or Gemini, sorry. When you do it with Gemini, right? You should do.
I'm out.
That's right. You should do that, because it is one of those surprising things that works, right?
Yeah.
That actually, by asking it a question, you'll get an answer. But if you ask it literally to walk through its reasoning, it comes up with a much better answer. And you and your team discovered that.
Yeah. So the intuition behind this is around what people call the system 2 thinking. So system 1 thinking is a lot about common sense, quick reactive thinking. But system 2 is systematic, slow thinking. And it's about all solving these hard tasks about how to get the answer right for something really hard, like planning, problem solving. If you ever want to go to a model and you say, hey, can you give me a way to come up with a vaccine for all cancers or something like that, right? So the model has to do a lot of research and a lot of thinking. So, and that's the reason why we start looking into this area of how to go beyond the next token prediction.
And you've had some pretty good results already, right?
Yeah. I mean, in some niche area, I would say this is a decade ago. This is 2014 for large language models, right?
What's one of those examples? What's a math-related example?
We made a lot of progress. For example, we solved, geometry almost completely. High school geometry, Euclidean geometry, we almost solved it completely using language model now. A few months ago, we participated in the IMO, high school Olympiad mathematics, and we got silver medal.
Right. I think one of the sort of slightly crazy things about you is that you are so low key, and you just said you solved geometry, and then basically you beat like the most cleverest kids in high school math. Like I don't know. I think this is a nerdy enough organization that everyone, it is a big accomplishment, but it's just a little. It's like one of those cases where it is it's a very specific problem, but in some ways it is one of those undercovered things that it made it in the newspaper, but then no one really thought about it much more, or for those out there just trying to figure out what's coming, it's just these secrets are all sitting around. We all thought that Google and OpenAI and Anthropic would stop publishing or stop announcing things. But in fact, in some ways, the opposite has happened, in part because there's competition. It feels like you guys are giving these markers about what's possible, right, in much clearer ways, I think, than the rest of us thought you would.
Yeah.
But tell us in the case of the IMO thing, so how does that even happen? How's it different than my copying and pasting one of those problems into Gemini chat and then sort of saying, pretend to be a very, very smart, PhD in math and solve this problem?
Yeah, a lot of this is very organic, right? So the first, we do a lot of these thought experiments, and for a long time, I've been championing the idea of next token prediction. Right, so the next thing I said is that, okay, let's extrapolate next token prediction, right? What are the hardest things that you can do with a next token prediction? And then you say, okay, let's do, and I would say geometry would be one, I think. And the reason is that, to solve a geometry, you really need to understand an image, right?
Right.
Which is it's sort of against my first statement, which is, blind people are smart, right? For this kind of thing, you really have to go and look at the image. You really have, but beyond that, you really have to come up with the right proof. It's not just the next step. It's not just a sample. You have to really get right or wrong. So basically what we did was, okay, so let's look into geometry, right? And then see how far we can push the large language models. And then obviously it will get absolutely 0% accuracy, right? It cannot solve any problem. And then we say, okay, intuitively, how are we going to solve this? Right. Basically, what we did was we have to augment with the search process. First of all, you have to think about how humans solve it, right? Sometimes you solve it, first you write out the proof, and then you look at it, and then you say, oh, there's something wrong about this, because, the step number 5 is wrong, or step number 10 is wrong. So let's revisit this thing. So intuitively, as a human, you write out the proof, you're thinking about it, and then you revise it. And the reason is that the next token prediction tend to have this problem that is a little bit of an error in every step will compound into like a huge error. So if you allow the model to think about the proof a little bit, it will do better. So that's the first step, right? So it has to search. And then it has to say at step number 5, if I make a statement, if you roll out for a long time, what does it mean, right? But maybe the problem is that step number 5. So if step number 5 is a problem, I should start trying a new approach. So it should look like a tree, right? So that's a second thing. And then the third thing would be, how do we train this model even though there's not a lot of geometry data on the internet, right? So how do we have synthetic data? A lot of people right now, thinking about synthetic data and so on. But basically, this work is actually started that sort of thinking. Is how do we augment the model without internet data, right? That's basically how we started. And then after we nail geometry, we say, how can we solve it? General math, right? That's how we went to alpha. And then a lot of people outside, they talk about strawberry, Q star, and so on. Actually, this thing is quite related.
It is, okay, so now this takes us, now I realize we've got 9 minutes. So this takes us now, well, I feel like there's probably one more thing for this audience. It's also the case now where so many of these ideas, sort of require a huge amount of compute and all this money, but a lot of the work you're doing just requires thinking, right? Being original about how you approach these problems.
Yeah, I think one thing I got wrong is about that, actually, is that I could not imagine anyone would spend $1 billion to train a model. And maybe that's the wrong way of thinking about it. Because of that, I pressure myself into thinking a lot, but I think I should have not think too much. Just ask for more money.
You should ask for more money. You should ask for more money. Okay, so now this goes to the third part, which is, obviously, Google has been so far ahead and had so much talent. They still have you. They have so many great people. So tell us a little bit about like why isn't Google in some ways more successful compared to, you know, sort of your friends who've gone over to OpenAI or Anthropic or other places?
I guess that maybe it comes down to the thing that I just said, right? That the lack of imagination that you can spend $1 billion or $10 billion to train these models, right? You can scale up compute so much. So that's one. I think the second thing is that all this breakthrough around ChatGPT, actually Google have very good models at the same time with OpenAI or even better. But the breakthrough in ChatGPT is around this idea called ILHF, right? And you know, basically human preference data. And human preference data teaches the model to narrow into like one particular persona that is very neutral and is generating, you know, sort of a very beautiful poem, sort of writing and so on, right? And this thing, you really need human data.
Right. You mean that do you mean that they were willing to invest in it, or do you?
They got it. They got this human data, this concept. But the base model, Google already had it, really good. But we did not realize that the power of human data into this thing. So it actually connects to my second point about next token prediction is a good thing for base model, but then you really need this stage of fine tuning. We got a little bit late about it, I think. Is the investment on human data.
Ironic, of course, being Google, the whole value of Google is our, you know, sort of like all the user data, all the clickstream data, right, sort of informs the model search engine so much.
Yeah, human data at Google is very large scale. Google is like a data company, right? So that's amazing. But we don't have data where every example would cost you a lot of money. Like you really need like a PhD to do this data point, right? You just need some very easy example, right? What website is better, right? But we don't have data where people spend a lot of time, like 50 minutes or an hour, to think about one example. So I guess that's the main problem. But I think it might go back to the incentive structure as well at Google, right? A lot of people who invented these models, like myself and so on, we were in research, right? And in research, the incentive was basically to just build models, but not to ship it into products, right? And most products were very busy with other things, right? So this is a problem with a large company. And
which is the whole point of startups.
Yeah, this is the whole point of startup, really, right?
And when you think about the products that you're most hopeful about or most impressed by, what are those sorts of products that you pay attention to?
I think the self-driving car is one example that I feel like is magical.
Right.
Unbelievable. I think the large language model is also.
But as far as the actual end products or end features of products, like what are the things?
I can't say ChatGPT.
You mean like things like ChatGPT? You can't say
things like ChatGPT and Gemini.
Right. Right. That's right. And then when you think about what Google should be doing going forward, how do you articulate that internally? When when someone even more senior than you comes and says, what should we be doing? Then what do you tell them?
Well, the first thing is that I think I have some doubt that how you can get to AGI with next token prediction. I think if the goal is AGI, I think I think next token prediction might be at the heart of it, but it's not everything. Right. You need some extra ingredients. So that's the first thing I want to say. But I obviously think that the large language models are extremely useful. And I think someone actually has to push really hard on the products because they're really useful. I use it almost every day. I think it's cool. It's going to be useful. I think whether it's going to be super intelligent, like a lot of people say, or I have some skepticism. First, we're going to hit like the data issue, right? Because everybody's going to train on the internet, right? So we're going to have the limitation of the data. And then we're going to hit the limitation of energy and money, right? Because the log function is actually going very quick. The exponential grows very quick.
So everyone knows the scaling slide that everyone shows about why you should do more AI because it's like so smart, right? And it's like a line, and they're like, look, it's like high school, college, PhD, post-PhD, and this is the cost, and it's like a beautiful line. And what no one says is that line is what scale? log scale,
log
right?
scale,
So
yeah,
it's like, well, so each tick is 1, 10, 100, 1,000. So it's really, like the actual scale of like the cost is like this, right?
Yeah,
Not
yeah.
like this beautiful line. And so they never tell that to the investors because they're hoping the investors won't notice, that to get to, that next level is another, 10x more expensive rather than, whatever, just, 1 unit more. I mean, the thing that strikes me, and I hope that you guys get a flavor of this, which is a few things I just want to call out from what you said. One is, there is just great value in pulling back and asking, like, what is the actual fundamental question, right? And I feel like you've just done that over and over again. The second thing that I would just highlight is that, I think a point that you made is like, these things take time, right? That there are a whole set of advances that have been, that have all been put out to the public, to the world, published in PDFs, readable anywhere for the last 10 years, that are just now coming into the point where they can be productionized and used and taken advantage of. But all the markers of what's possible are there, right? And so that's on one hand. There's also this other sense that there's like these other opportunities and bigger questions that like you now see the cutting edge dealing with, but they'll take time, that they don't happen in 3 months, they don't happen in 9 months. And so in that sense, like wherever you are in like sort of how you're thinking about adoption, there is both time, but also there's this need to actually think clearly about what you're actually trying to do, which is like sort of like, I think the fun of talking to someone like you and hopefully talking to Christopher and their team, right? I feel like one of the things that Christopher and his team do so well is that they're very clear-minded about what is the atomic unit, what is the primitive, what's the way to build up to get to some larger plan. And so hopefully you guys get a sense of what that looks like and get a sense of like why you're so special and why you should read all of his papers, or you should ask Gemini to summarize his papers and say, explain them to me as if I'm a smart high schooler, because it totally works. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah.